The night Highway 61 closed, my boss called me at 10:40 and told me the generator at the school site was dead. That was all she gave me on the phone. Generators down, slabs at 38 and falling, then a pause with wind in it. What she did not say was that she had been sitting in that job trailer since 5 o'clock with a letter of intent to sell her father's company lying open on the desk, and that my name was in it, page 3, one sentence written by men I had never met about what happened to me after she signed. That was the snow that comes off Lake Superior sideways at 9 degrees. The plows had quit on the hillside streets. The radio was reading school closings and the voice people use for hostage negotiations. We had poured 4,000 square feet of slab the Thursday before, the addition at Ridgeview Elementary. Fresh concrete is a chemical reaction, not a rock. Let it freeze in that first week and the floor cracks from the inside, and you find that out later under a gymnasium full of 9-year-olds. You don't patch it, you break it out and pour it again, out of somebody's pocket. Ours. So I put my truck in 4-wheel drive, told my dog he was in charge, and drove across a city that had stopped agreeing to be a city. The site road had drifted in. I walked the last 200 yards with a flashlight and a can of diesel while the wind put snow down my collar with what I would call personal intent. The trailer light was on. One yellow window out there and all that white, like the last honest thing in Minnesota. I went to the generator first. Diesel turns to wax when it gets cold enough, so a machine with a full tank dies of thirst, which is one of the great practical jokes of the northern trades. I warmed the filter against the block, dosed it, bled the line, and cranked it. Third try. The heaters came back up. I pulled a corner of the blanket and set my probe on the concrete, 37. 15 minutes later, 39. I stood in the dark and watched a number climb 1 degree at a time, and if you want to know what my life looked like at 34, that was a fair sample. Then I went to the trailer. Cass Beale sat behind her father's desk, boots on the file drawer, a coffee she was not drinking. She had Merle's canvas work coat on over her clothes. That coat was cut for a man built like a loading dock. On her, the shoulders hung down by her elbows and the sleeves were rolled 3 times each, and she had worn it every day since the funeral in a way nobody in the office had worked up the nerve to mention. She did not look up right away. Slab? 39 and climbing. It'll be fine. Generator? Fuel gelled. It's running. I put the spare cans inside so they don't do it again. Okay, she said. And then she didn't say anything else. And that was when I understood that the generator was not the reason the lights were on in that trailer at 11 o'clock at night. She slid a piece of paper across the desk with 2 fingers. Letter of intent. Renner Northland, out of the Iron Range. 6 pages written to sound like a handshake and behave like a fence. Her brother's signature at the bottom of the last page, dated 11 days earlier. Page 3. Workforce retention. The purchaser would keep 1 field crew through the transition, under its existing superintendent. That's me. There was my whole working life, in the passive voice. I read it twice. The trailer heater ticked. Outside, the wind found the corner of the building and made that low note, and the plastic over a window opening 200 feet away snapped like somebody shaking out a bedsheet. He can't sell without you, I said. You're 51%. I'm 51% of a company that owes the bank $400,000 and has 11 weeks of work booked past this school job, Cass said. Dale's not selling it out from under me. He's showing me the door and being polite about where it is. I set the letter down. There were 9 or 10 useful sentences available to me right then. I found none of them and stood there holding my hat in both hands like a man at a viewing. She went to the window and stood with her back to me. Merle's sleeves swallowed her hands. Nate. Yeah. Please don't leave me alone tonight. The wind kept going. The heater kept ticking. The number on my probe kept climbing 1 degree at a time out there under the blankets, doing its job, not caring at all what had just been said in a 14 by 60 trailer in the middle of a closed city. I'm Nate Holt. I'm 34 years old. I run job sites for Beale Construction in Duluth, Minnesota, which means I own 11 pairs of gloves and cannot find 2 of them. And the woman who had just asked me not to leave was my boss. Not my boss the way people say it about somebody 2 floors up who signs a form once a year. My boss. She hired me. She approved my time cards. She wrote my reviews, set my pay, and had the authority to end my employment on any Tuesday she wanted. I said okay. That is the whole heroic speech. Okay. I hung my coat on the nail by the door, sat down on the floor with my back against the file cabinet, which put 12 feet of trailer between us, and stayed where I was. Here is what you need to understand about the 12 feet. Merle Beale hired me in the spring of the year my own 2-man outfit went under. I had a truck with a bad transmission, an unpaid lumber bill, and a business plan that had been written mostly by optimism. Merle looked at my numbers for about 9 seconds, said, "You can build, you can't bid," and put me on his crew as a lead carpenter at $18 an hour. 10 years later, I was running his sites. He taught me how to sequence a job, how to talk to an inspector, and how to tell a man he was fired without taking away the part of him that would go get another job on Monday. Cass grew up on those sites the way other kids grow up in church pews. She could read a set of prints before she could drive. She went off and got an engineering degree and worked 6 years for a firm in Minneapolis that built parking structures, and then Merle got sick and she came home and never went back. He died in March, in the yard, sitting in his truck with the heater running. The service was at the church on 4th Street, and there were 400 people in it, and half of them had learned their trade from him. Cass gave the eulogy in under 2 minutes. She thanked everyone for coming and said her father would have wanted them to go back to work. And then she went out to the parking lot and stood between 2 pickups until her hands stopped shaking. And I know that because I was the one who came out to tell her the caterer needed an answer about the sandwiches. She took his coat off the hook in the office on the Monday after and had it on ever since. So, 12 feet. Around 1 in the morning, she stopped pretending to work and lay down on the cot the crew used for lunch breaks, still in the coat. And I sat there listening to the wind and to the generator and to the small clicks of a trailer contracting in the cold. "You're not going to say anything about it," she said, out of the dark. "About what?" "About any of it. That's why I called you and not my brother. That's why I called you and not Marge. Marge would have brought a casserole and opinions. Marge would have brought a binder. Marge would have brought a binder," I agreed. She laughed once, low, and it turned into something that was not laughing about halfway through. And she got that under control fast because she is her father's daughter, and God forbid anybody see the actual weather in there. Sometime after that, she said, "You could have taken the retention offer. You didn't have to show me you read page 3. You handed me the letter. You could have skipped page 3. I skipped page 4, I said. Page 4 is mostly about arbitration. That got a real laugh, small and surprised, and then the trailer was quiet for a long time. I checked the slab probe at 2, at 3, and at 4, which meant putting my boots on and walking out into it 3 times and coming back with my eyebrows white. 39, 41, 43. The concrete was going to live. At 4:15, when I came back in, she was awake and sitting up with her back to the wall. "Nate, it's holding." That's not what I was going to ask. I stood in the doorway with snow melting off my shoulders and the cold coming in behind me. And I did not close the door, which I remember exactly, because closing that door would have been a decision. She looked at me for a second longer than she needed to. Then she said, "Never mind," and lay back down. And I sat on the floor until the plows came through at 6, and the sky went from black to the color of dishwater. Marge got there at 7:20 with a thermos and a look. Curtis got there at 7:40 in a Carhartt jacket over basketball shorts, which is a decision I have never received an adequate explanation for. At the coffee pot, with her back to me and her voice at its normal volume, Cass said, "Last night stays in this trailer." "Which part?" "All of it." "Understood." "I mean it, Holt. I know you do." And that was the arrangement. She went back to being the woman who signed my time cards, and I went back to being the man who could not stop noticing that her sleeves were rolled 3 times. Let me tell you about Cass Beale the way the job site knew her, because that is more accurate than anything I could say about how I saw her. She read prints by spreading them on the deck and kneeling on the corners, which meant she spent half her working life on her knees in sawdust and had a permanent gray stripe on both thighs. She kept a carpenter's pencil behind her ear, forgot it was there, and bought another one. And there were pencils of hers in every truck in the fleet. She knew the name of every man's wife on that crew and 2 of the dogs. She could not tell you what she had eaten that day. And when a supplier tried to walk back a price over the phone, her voice dropped about half a step and got very calm, and the whole office would go quiet and pretend to be typing. She was not a soft woman. She was the other thing, which people confuse with softness because it also involves paying attention. The storm blew out by Saturday. The slab cured. On Monday, the numbers were exactly where they had been on Friday, which is the cruelty of numbers. 400,000 owed to the bank. 11 weeks of work booked past the school job, which in this trade is the distance between you and the edge of a table. And Dale, down in Minneapolis with 49% and a signed letter, calling twice a week to explain that he was being reasonable. I did the only thing I have ever been good at. I went out on that site every morning at 6:10 and built the building. February in Duluth is not a month, it's a sentence you serve. We framed interior walls in a building with plastic for windows and 4 salamander heaters going, and the crew wore so many layers that from a distance they moved like furniture. Curtis learned that if you leave a bottle of water in the gang box overnight, it becomes an ice sculpture of a bottle of water. He learned this twice. Cass came out to the site most mornings, which was new. Merle had run everything from the office phone and 1 visit a week. She ran it from the deck, on her knees, on the prints, with her hood down in 9-degree weather, because she said she couldn't hear the crew through it. She also started showing up at 6:10 with 2 coffees. She never handed me one. She set it on the gang box next to my tape and walked off to find Curtis, and it was always the right one, black, no lid, because I'd take the lid off anyway, and she'd watched me do it for 10 years. The second week she caught me working in my beat-up spare gloves, the ones with the thumb blown out, and she stopped mid-sentence about a door schedule, pulled the good pair out of my truck door where they had been sitting since Tuesday, and dropped them on the box next to the coffee. You never remember the good pair. They're stiff. They're dry, she said, and went back to the door schedule like nothing had happened. And I stood there in 9 degrees with warm hands, doing math I had no business doing. We were bidding everything that moved. 2 clinics, a fire hall in Hermantown, 3 church basements, and a stretch of county road work we had no business touching, and both knew it. That's how I ended up in the truck with her one Thursday, driving up the shore to 2 harbors for a pre-bid walkthrough, 40 miles with the lake on our right, gray and flat and giving off steam. Somewhere around Knife River, she said. Ask me the question. Which one? The one you've been chewing on since the trailer. I passed a salt truck, took my time about it. Why not just sign? I said. Renner pays off the bank, you keep a title, Dale gets his money, and nobody has to eat 40 pounds of stress a week. That's not a question. It is if you say it slower. She was quiet for about a mile. My dad mortgaged the yard in 2016 to make payroll during the mine layoffs, she said. 22 guys. He never told anybody. Marge found out because she does the books, and she never told him she knew, and he never told her he knew she knew. And those 2 ran a company like that for 24 years. She turned to the window. Renner keeps 1 crew, yours. 11 men out of 31. So you already did that math. I do that math in the shower, Nate. I do that math in the dentist chair. There is a sound a truck cab makes at 55 miles an hour when nobody in it is talking, and I got to know it well between Knife River and 2 harbors. The walkthrough was a district maintenance building, and there were 4 other contractors there, all of them men over 50 who had known Merle. They shook my hand first. Every single one of them. Cass was standing right there with the prints under her arm, and they shook my hand first, and then said, "How you holding up, kiddo?" to the woman who owned the company. She did not correct them. She waited. Then the district's facilities director asked a question about the existing steam lines, and Cass answered it in about 90 seconds, from memory, including the year the lines were replaced, the diameter, and the 2 spots where the as-built were wrong because her father had done the work in 1998, and she had been 11 years old and holding the flashlight. The room reorganized itself around her. I have never seen anything like it. 4 old bidders leaning in toward a woman in a coat 3 sizes too big, asking her follow-up questions, and she answered every one of them without once looking at me for backup. On the way out, one of them said, "You're your father's kid." "I'm the one who's here," she said pleasantly, and got in the truck. I stood in the parking lot for a second with the wind coming off the water. Then I got in and started the engine and said, "For the record, I would have voted for you." "For what?" "Anything. President, homecoming, anything you want." "You're being weird, Holt." "I'm being professional. This is what professional sounds like when it's cold." She snorted and pulled her hands up into her sleeves and looked out the window at the lake. "And I drove 40 miles at 8 over the limit with my hands at 10 and 2 like a man taking a road test. Here's the thing nobody tells you about wanting something at work. It isn't the wanting. The wanting is manageable. It's the accounting. Every ordinary thing you would do for anybody has to be run through a filter first. If I brought coffee for the crew, I brought coffee for the crew. If I brought coffee for her, that was a message. If I carried the prince, was that courtesy, or was that something else with courtesy stapled to the front of it? If I stayed late, was I staying late? And under all of it, one flat fact that did not move. She signed my time cards. Whatever I might have said, in that trailer or in that truck, I would have been saying it to a woman who could not say no to me without wondering what it would cost her on Monday. That is not a romantic obstacle. That is a real one. Men have used the same 12 feet of trailer for uglier reasons than mine and told themselves the same story about how it was mutual. So I did the accounting. Every day. It was exhausting, and I was not always good at it, and there was one afternoon in March when she put her hand flat on my back to move past me on scaffold plank, and I forgot the entire sequence of a wall I had built 200 times. I was engaged once, at 27, to a woman named Bree who taught 3rd grade and who moved to Denver for a job she had earned and asked me to come. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 4 months, which is its own kind of answer. She got married 2 years later to a man who works in water treatment and, from the pictures, is happier than I ever made her, and I mean that without a single drop of poison in it. My mother says I take a long time. My mother is being kind. By the first week of April, we had won the fire hall and lost the clinics. The bank moved us to a new relationship manager, which in bank language means somebody upstairs has drawn a circle around your name. Dale started calling Marge instead of Cass, which is a thing a person does when they're building a record, and Cass stopped sleeping. I could tell because she started answering emails at 4 in the morning, and because she got quiet in the specific way she gets quiet, which is not silence. It's brevity. Sentences with the trim taken off. Yes. No. Fine. Do it. The mistake I'm going to tell you about now took me about 90 seconds to make, and about 3 weeks to pay for. It was a Thursday in the middle of April. Rain, not snow, which up here in April is somehow worse. I came back to the office at 7 to drop off a change order, and the lights were on, and Cass was at the conference table with the equipment schedule spread out and a calculator she was not using. She said, "Sit down a second," and I sat down, and then she started talking. Not about the numbers, about the yard on Rice Lake Road, and how her dad had bought it in 1994 with money from selling his boat, and how he used to take her out there on Sundays and let her drive the skid steer around the gravel pile when she was 9. About how she still parked in the same spot he did. About how she had been the person in her family who left, and how everyone had been proud of her for leaving, and how now she was the one who stayed, and it had somehow become a smaller thing. She said, "I'm so tired that I looked at his coat on Tuesday and thought, I could just call Renner. I could just call and be done and go work for somebody else's company and be home at 5. And I said, okay, so here's what we do. I want you to appreciate the speed of it." She had not finished exhaling. I gave her 3 steps. Sell the Rice Lake yard. Cut the 2 smallest crews to seasonal. Take the Renner kept trying to hand us and swallow our pride about the margin. It was good advice. That's the part that still gets me. 6 months later, she did 2 of those 3 things. But she had not asked for it, and she had not been talking about the company at all. And I sat there across the table from a woman who had just told me she looked at her dead father's coat and thought about quitting, and I handed her a project schedule. Something in her face closed like a shop at 6. "That's smart," she said. "Cass." "No, it is. That's the right sequence." She squared the papers. "Thanks for staying late." "Cass." "Good night, Nate." For the next 2.5 weeks, I was Holt, not cold. That would have been easier. She was perfectly professional, and she copied Marge on everything, and she stopped coming out to the site in the mornings. And when she needed something from me, it arrived as an email at 4:12 in the morning with a subject line and no greeting. Curtis noticed by the second day, because 20-year-olds notice everything and understand none of it. "Are you in trouble? Go carry something." "Is it because of the change order?" "Curtis, because I told her it wasn't your fault." "Curtis, I will personally pay you $11 to go carry something." On the 9th day, Marge cornered me by the copier with her reading glasses pushed up in her hair and asked me what I had done, and I told her. Marge has worked in that office since 2002. She keeps a jar of butterscotch on her desk that no one has ever seen anyone eat. She looked at me over the top of nothing at all and said, "You know what that girl has, Nate? She's got 31 men who need her to be sure, a brother who needs her to be wrong, and a bank that needs her to be smaller." She went back to the copier. "She had one person she didn't have to be the owner in front of, and you turned into another guy with a plan." I stood in that hallway holding a stack of warm paper and did not have one single thing to say. I fixed it the following Tuesday, badly, in the parking lot, in the rain, because I have never in my life picked a good location for anything. "I gave you a schedule," I said. "You were telling me about your dad and I gave you a schedule." She had her keys in her hand and her hood up. "Yeah, I'm not going to do that again." "Okay." "I mean it. You want to say a thing out loud, you say it, and I'm going to stand there with my mouth shut like a normal person." "That'll be new for you." "It'll be a real stretch," I said. "I may need to take a class." She almost smiled. Rain was coming off the edge of her hood in a line. She said, "You were right about the yard," and I said, "I know, that's what makes it worse." And she laughed one syllable and unlocked her truck, and things thawed about 40%, which is what April in Duluth does anyway. 12 days later, Dale Beal came north. He came on a Friday afternoon at 3:30, which is not an accident. 3:30 on a Friday is when the crew is stacking material and thinking about the weekend and can hear everything. He pulled into the Rice Lake yard in a Suburban with a man named Bud Renner in the passenger seat, and he did not go to the office. He stood between the 2 equipment rows in a quarter zip with the letter of intent rolled in his fist, and he read the material terms out loud like a man reading a proclamation. Purchase price, assumption of debt, retention of 1 crew. 9 of our guys were standing there with their hands in their pockets. Cass came out of the office with Marge behind her and stopped about 15 feet from her brother and said very quietly, "Dale, inside." "They're going to hear it eventually." "Inside." And then Dale turned his head and looked at me. And I want to be clear that up to that second, I was nothing in this. I was a guy holding a clipboard. "You want to talk about eventually," he said. "Ask your superintendent how long he's known." The yard got quiet in that particular way a worksite does, where nobody stops moving. Everybody just slows down about 30%. "Bud called him in December," Dale said. "Offered him a spot. December, Cass, before I ever signed anything." Bud Renner had the decency to look at the gravel. Every man in that yard turned to see what my face was going to do, because it was true. Bud Renner called me on the 12th of December. I was under my kitchen sink with a pipe wrench. He offered me a superintendent job at $86,000 with a truck, and I said no on that same call, in under a minute, and then I finished the trap and ate a sandwich and never said a word about it to anyone. Not to Cass, not to Marge, not to my mother, who would have wanted to discuss the truck. At the time, it was nothing. That is the honest size of it. A guy called. I said no. Life continued. It became something else entirely the night I read page 3 in a job trailer and understood that Bud had already been shopping for the crew he wanted to keep. And by then, telling her would have required me to explain why I hadn't told her in the first place, and that explanation had a room in it I was not going into. So in the yard on a Friday at 3:30, with 9 of our guys watching, all I had was the truth, which is a terrible piece of equipment in a fight because it can't be aimed. He called, I said. In December. I said no in the same phone call. But you didn't mention it, Dale said. No. Huh, Dale said, to the yard in general. Cass did not look at me. She said, Dale, inside, a third time, and this time he went, and Marge went in after them and shut the office door, and that was that. She didn't defend me. I have thought about it from every angle since, and I understand it now, but I did not understand it standing in that gravel. 9 men were looking at me, and one of them, Lonnie, who has 3 kids and a boat payment, asked me straight out, Am I on your list? There is no answer to that. There is no list. But once a man asks you that in a yard, there is a list. In his head, forever. The rest of Friday I walked the fire hall foundation with a level and a temper. I did not hear from her that night. Or Saturday. Sunday, I drove out to the school site for no reason at all, and stood in the finished gymnasium with the light coming through the plastic and listened to the way a room that big makes your breathing sound like somebody else's. Monday she was at the site at 7 and ran the job walk like nothing had happened, which was worse than a fight. She asked about the roof deck. She asked about the door schedule. She did not ask about December. Tuesday, same. Wednesday, same. That's the part I would go back and change, if I were the kind of man who got to change thing. Not the December phone call. The 3 days I spent letting a woman decide, in private, whether the person she had asked to stay in that trailer had been auditioning for her brother's buyer the whole time. She came out Wednesday at 7 at night, after the crew had cleared, and found me in the mechanical room labeling conduit that did not require labeling. December 12th, she said. Yeah. Why didn't you say anything? I set the marker down on the panel. Because it took him 90 seconds to make the offer and it took me 30 to say no, and I didn't think a thing that took 30 seconds counted as news. I turned around. And because if I'd told you, you'd have asked me why I turned it down, and I didn't have an answer for that I was willing to say out loud in an office. The mechanical room has a fan in it that runs on a timer. It kicked on right then, and we both stood there and let it run. Say it now, she said. No. Nate. No. You've got a brother telling this crew I've been shopping myself since Christmas. You've got a bank drawing circles around your name. And if I say it in this room right now, it's not a thing I said. It's a thing your superintendent said to you while you were holding his job in your hand. I picked the marker back up because my hands needed employment. You can't say no to me safely. That's the whole problem. Until that's not true, I'm not saying anything to you that you'd have to be careful about. She stood in the doorway of that mechanical room for a good 10 seconds. So what's your plan? She said. Since you've always got one. I take leave. Unpaid, until the ownership thing is settled. Marge runs the schedule, Curtis is better than he looks, and nobody in that yard gets to say you kept me around for the wrong reason. And Cass Beale, who had not raised her voice at me one time in 10 years, raised it. There it is. She came 2 steps in. You did it again. You walked in here with the whole thing already decided, and you brought it to me finished, like a bid I'm supposed to sign. Her hand went up and then went down again. That's my company. Those are my 31 guys. That was my father's yard your buddy Bud is trying to buy at 80 cents, and you are standing in a mechanical room deciding what I can survive. I'm trying to protect you from what? From liking somebody? She said it flat, without decoration, and the fan chose that moment to shut off. Don't do my hard part for me. I have been doing my hard part since March. She left. I labeled every piece of conduit in that building. Some of it twice. In the weeks after that, she did all of the following, and I had nothing to do with a single piece of it. She sent Renner a 2-sentence reply that Marge later photocopied and hung above the butterscotch jar. Then she listed the Rice Lake yard. Sit with that one. That's the gravel her father let her drive the skid steer on when she was 9. It sold in 11 days to a trucking outfit, and she signed the papers on a Tuesday morning and went to a job walk at 10:40. She moved the company into 3 rented bays, put the yard money against the debt, and bought her brother's 49% with what was left and a note in her own name. She paid him more than Renner would have, on purpose, so that nobody in that family 10 years from now could tell the story any other way. And she took the small work: culverts, sidewalk replacement, 2 roof jobs and a boiler room. Merle used to call that stuff nickel work and let it go to the outfits out of Cloquet. Cass bid 9 of them and won 6, and that is how 31 men stayed employed through a summer. I found all of this out the way everybody else did. She called a yard meeting on the last Friday in May. 31 guys standing around in the new bays that still smelled like somebody else's business. She stood up on the deck of a lowboy trailer in her father's coat and she said, "The company is not for sale. No one is being cut. Wages hold through the year, and there is no list, and if anybody hears the word list again, they can bring it to her." Lonnie asked if the yard was really gone. "It's gone," she said. "I'd rather sell his gravel than his crew." Then she got down off the trailer and went back to work. And it is a strange thing to fall the rest of the way in love with somebody while standing in a gravel lot with 30 other men. But I am telling you what happened. On the 1st of June, Marge put a piece of paper on my clipboard without comment. A copy of the company minutes. Effective that day, the field superintendent reported to the operations manager, not to the president. My pay, my reviews, and my job itself were out of Cass Beal's hands and into Marge's. And then the reason, typed in 1 sentence, in a document that will sit in a filing cabinet as long as that company exists. Potential conflict of interest between the president and the field superintendent. She had written down the true reason. She had not dressed it up as a reorganization. I found her at the fire hall in Hermantown at 8 that night. The trusses had gone up that week and the sheathing hadn't, so the whole frame stood open and the sky came down through it in strips. Somebody's compressor was still hooked up on the deck with the hose coiled next to it. She was sitting on a bundle of sheathing with her boots crossed at the ankle. "You could have told me you were doing that," I said. "Nope. Cass. If I'd told you first, you'd have said, 'Don't do it on my account,' and then it would have been a decision we made." She looked up. "It's not that. I'd have moved that reporting line in March if I'd had 2 brain cells in an hour. It's bad governance. My dad ran a company where the owner could fire anyone she liked over anything at all, and it worked for 24 years because he was a decent man, and that's not a system, that's just luck." "Okay. Also," she said, "I wanted it on paper before anything, so that nobody in that yard ever gets to say I did it after. Not getting caught isn't the same as not doing it." I stood there in an unfinished building with my hands hanging. "Say the thing you wouldn't say in the mechanical room," she said. And I opened my mouth and almost said, "Don't ask me that until the note's paid and the school's turned over and you've had 1 full year of sleep." And I heard how it sounded before it got out, and I stopped, because I had promised her in a parking lot in the rain that I was done deciding what she could carry. So instead I said the true thing, and it took 4 seconds, which after 5 months is a poor return on investment. I didn't take Bud's job because it would have meant not seeing you. The trusses ticked overhead, the way wood does when the day's heat leaves it. "December 12th, she said. "Yeah. Nate, you said no to 86,000 and a truck in 90 seconds. 30, I said. It was a very efficient phone call. She stood up off the sheathing bundle and she crossed the deck, and she took hold of the front of my shirt in her fist like she was checking a strap, and neither of us was doing anything clever anymore. The kiss did not arrive politely. There had been no polite version of it available for months. It was 2 people who had been standing on opposite sides of a rule for 5 months, finally putting the rule down, and it tasted like sawdust and coffee and the metal edge of cold air that Duluth keeps even in June, and her hand was still fisted in my shirt like she thought I might get logical again. The compressor kicked on. Somebody had left it plugged in and the tank had bled down, and the thing fired at 40 decibels 3 feet away, and we both came off the ground about an inch. She started laughing with her forehead against my collarbone. 10 years, she said, and it's a compressor. It's always a compressor. We told Marge the next morning, because you do not keep a secret from a woman who reconciles your bank statements. She listened to the whole rehearsed explanation, minutes and reporting line and all, took her glasses out of her hair and said, "Nathan, I've had a card in my drawer since February. It has a picture of 2 loons on it." Then she went back to the copier. The Ridgeview edition turned over on the 26th of June, 4 days early. Cass walked the punch list with the district's facilities director and did not once mention that the slab under his feet had spent a January night at 37 degrees with a man crouched over a probe every hour. I asked her to marry me in the truck outside the school on the September morning it opened, with second graders going in the front doors in single file. I did it so poorly the first time that she made me get out and do it again in the parking lot, where she could hear the whole thing. So I said it again, standing on the asphalt with a school bus idling behind me. The first night you asked me to stay, I stayed 12 feet away, because 12 feet was the right answer that night. My hands were shaking, and there was no hiding it. I'm asking if I can spend the rest of it a lot closer than that. Cass looked at the building her crew had put up, and then at me. 12 feet, she said. You measured. I measure everything. It's a whole career. She said yes somewhere in the middle of that sentence, which is why I never got to the end of it. In October, she stopped wearing her father's coat. I noticed on a Thursday. She came into the bay in a canvas jacket that fit her, one she had bought herself, still stiff and dark at the seams the way new canvas is. Merle's coat hung on the hook by the office door with the sleeves still rolled 3 times, and she left it there, and it stayed there, which is where a coat goes when the person wearing it is done needing it to be a house. We got married in May at the church on 4th Street, and Marge gave the only toast, and it was 11 words long. Merle hired him because he could build. Turns out he could stay. The following January, the lake stayed open late and gave us a storm that closed 61 for 2 days. I got the call at 10:20 at night. Not from Cass, from Curtis, who is 22 now and runs his own crew and has learned to keep the spare cans inside where the fuel won't gel, and who called to tell me the generator at the clinic site was already running. Thanks, he'd handled it. Go back to sleep. So we stayed home. That was the whole event. Snow going sideways past the kitchen window, the plows working the hill, my wife at the table with the equipment schedule and a carpenter's pencil behind her ear that she had already forgotten about. I said, "You want me to drive out and check it anyway?" She didn't look up. "No, I could. Nate. I'm just saying the slab." "There's no slab. It's a parking lot." "There's always a slab somewhere," I said. And Cass put her pencil down and looked at me across our kitchen table, in a warm house, in the middle of a storm that had closed the highway, and said the thing I still think about when the wind comes up off the water at night. "You told me what to do exactly once, and then you never did it again." She reached over and took my coffee, which is her whole marital philosophy in one gesture. That's the part I married. Outside, the snow kept coming off the lake sideways, the way it does, not caring what anybody had planned. Inside, nobody had to ask anybody to stay. What would you have done if the person who signed your time cards asked you not to leave her alone on the worst night of her year? And have you ever had someone ask you to stay on the exact night you had already decided to keep your distance? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.